Hey everybody, Ross here, and this is Bible Study Superstar. If this is your first time on this channel, click here to go back to the intro, or if you'd like to see just what's been happening recently, click here to go back to Genesis 21. And without further ado, I'm just going to jump right on in to Genesis 22, verse 1. Now it came to pass, after these things, that God tested Abraham, and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you loved, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, and saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son. And he split the wood for the burnt offering, and arose, and went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted his eyes, and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand, and a knife, and the 2 of them went together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. Then he said, Look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. So the 2 of them went together. Then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar there, and placed the wood in order. And he bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on the lad, or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram, and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, The Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time out of heaven, and said, By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing, and have not withheld your son, your only son. Blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants, as the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they rose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. Now it came to pass, after these things, that it was told Abraham, saying, Indeed, Milcah has borne children to your brother Nahor, Huz his firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Phildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel begot Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. His concubine, whose name was Remuel, also bore Teba, Gesham, Tahash, and Maachah. Alright, why did Abraham need to be tested? God knew that Abraham loved him, But he wanted to see if Abraham loved him enough to do absolutely anything he asked of him. Now, the command probably confused and grieved Abraham a great deal. How could God bring about his great nation if Isaac was dead? It seemed contradictory to everything God had said so far. We know that God never changes, and I'd be willing to bet that Abraham had a pretty good idea of God's consistency too. So why did Abraham go along with it, instead of saying that the devil or even the flesh was telling him to do this and ignoring it? Two possibilities come to mind. Number one, Abraham knew God's voice. Thus, Abraham knew God and how consistent and good he was. He could have been aware of, on some level, that this was a test. This seems unlikely, though, because if Abraham knew that God would not allow him to kill Isaac, it would not be a test. And number two, Abraham knew God's voice and knew what God was capable of. Thus, Abraham believed so strongly in God and his promises that he knew that God would still do what he had promised, regardless if Isaac was alive or not. He could have thought that God would either raise Isaac from the dead, or that he would have another son that would be the child of promise, instead of Isaac. This scenario seems much more likely, as it would require complete and total faith and dependence on God to move forward with what he had commanded. Despite his confusion and grief, Abraham shows his faith and obedience by immediately setting out from where God had directed him, first thing in the morning. Moving on, when Abraham tells his young men that we will come back to you, he really has no idea how prophetic he's being. As far as he knows, he's coming back alone. Now, when Abraham tells Isaac that God will provide the lamb for the sacrifice, I think he says this in both faith and as a prayer. His faith is that no matter what happens, God will still be God and will always provide. His prayer, at least I think, is that while he won't disobey God, he's hoping that God will provide a substitute for Isaac. Moving on again, the ram is a symbol for Jesus in this instance. Just as the ram substituted Isaac because God provided the substitution, God's righteousness and holiness demands that all sin be punished by death, and thus all of us were under the death penalty. But Jesus stepped in and took our place so that we could live. Not only could we live because of Jesus' sacrifice, but we could be free from the death penalty that is sin and live in God's presence. If Abraham and Isaac were excited when God provided the ram, then we who know and love Jesus Christ should be dancing in the streets and shouting for joy because God provided his Son to take the punishment we deserved. Now, because Abraham obeyed God even to the point of offering his only son, God reaffirmed his promise to make Abraham a great nation and to bless the world through him and his descendants. And finally, I think the only reason we're told of Nahor's descendants is because Rebekah is mentioned. This is important because Isaac eventually marries Rebekah. And that's all I have for today. Thanks for watching. If you have any comments, feedback, or suggestions, leave them below as a video response or in the comments. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you all soon in Genesis 23.